So right now we're just waiting for the stream to catch for us to go live. Can you give a signal when we're live?
And we are live.
All right. Happy Thursday, everybody. I think we're going to have some listeners slowly kind of come online to listen to us, tune in. Welcome to this Tech Talk on, well, Green Tech Talk even. And as you can see in this illustration here, everybody is very happy and waving and smiling. And I hope that represents also the audience today. If it doesn't, well, have a think about that. Why not? My name is Sebastian Streifert. I'll be your host today. I'll take you through this. I work at a little company called Beetroot that you might have heard of. We are organizing this. But this talk is not about us. So I still want to give you a rough idea who stands behind all this. And that's why I'm just showing this slide. Beetroot is essentially a group of companies that takes care of the full spectrum of software and tech talent. So that includes programming, cloud solutions, apps, cybersecurity, with a particular focus on green tech. That's why we're hosting this talk. We're also doing upskilling of teams and workshops. For an example, we have a green coding workshop that we provide to companies that want to make sure that their entire teams know what's up. And we are here to create positive change in the world, and that's why we're so happy to have a few very experienced panel members with us. And I think you can already see their portraits here on the screen. Unfortunately, Sarah Shi, who's is unable to join us. She was initially planned to be here, but we're still excited to jump into this with this very experienced lineup of 4 people. Starting out, I'd like to introduce Asim Hussain. You're the Executive Director of the Green Software Foundation, also a very experienced developer, author, speaker with over 25 years of experience in tech. Hi, welcome. I think you're muted. Good to get this.
Oh yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Good. We also have Stephen Bay. You're the Senior Director of Product Growth and Innovation. You have 13 years of experience in Scope 3 decarbonization. And just for those of you who don't know who that is in the audience, what that is in the audience, in simplified terms, and correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but it refers to the efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the whole value chain of a company. Is that fair?
That is fair. That is fair. Happy to be here.
All right, welcome, Stephen. We also have Simon Pilston Jones. I'm not sure I got the British last name right. But something.
That's perfect. Thank you.
That's perfect. Good. Managing Director at Emerald Carbon. You have tons of experience. You're a lawyer. You've established and led 4 different decarbonization-focused businesses in the past 6 years. So an incredible resume. Very happy to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
And we have Nakhla Salim. Also very happy to have you. You're the head of product at Haven Energy. You're helping basically homeowners move to clean energy independence. And you have a background in several machine learning teams. So that's quite robust. Also very happy to have you with us.
Hello, everyone.
Good. And that is our panel today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a moment, and we're going to jump into the first question. And basically, actually, before I do that, I'm just going to explain the format. We're going to cover 3 major topics today. There's going to be a few questions on each. So the first block is going to be about green software or green coding. The second block is going to be about building green tech products. And the third block will be it'll be a little bit more about use cases and AI big data. It's not going to be a super technical talk, but there will be technical aspects. It's also not going to be a sustainability talk, but there will be sustainability aspects. I think what we're going for is trying to bridge some kind of space between green software, green products, and just green tech as a sphere that draws on so many other expertise areas. And that's why I'm happy to have a diverse skill set on this panel, because you all come with very different knowledge and experience. So kicking it off, I just want to hear what you would say in your own words green software is. Like, what is that for you? Maybe in your reality, your job, or maybe even have a pretty accurate, objective definition. Anybody wants to start?
Perhaps I'll start because we have a pretty clear objective definition on the Green Software Foundation website. So yeah, so we describe green software as, and I think because this was intentionally, our focus is that software has a carbon footprint, and we want to reduce the carbon footprint of software. And so we say that green software is software that we describe as carbon efficient, which means for each unit of value that it's giving to an end user, it's emitting the least amount of carbon possible. And right now, we describe that as three pillars that make something carbon efficient. The first one is energy efficiency, because the biggest emitter of carbon these days is still the creation of electricity. And if you could just make your software use less electricity, it will emit your carbon emissions. The second one we call hardware efficiency, which is using the least amount of hardware possible, which I won't go into, but there's a couple of different flavors of that. And the last one is something quite exciting, actually. It's called carbon aware computing, which right now currently is defined as doing more when the electricity is clean and doing less when the electricity is dirty. So in the electricity markets might call this a version of demand response or something like that. But what's really exciting is that kind of moving forward, as you know, start of next year and kind of moving onwards in there, we're going to see carbon aware computing evolve into a much more broader discipline, where software that will respond to not only signals from the electricity grid, but to respond from signals from infrastructure as well. So data centers could say, we're a little bit busy right now. If you were to send us something new, we'd have to spin up a whole new building. Could you pause for 5 minutes? And where software could kind of give signals back to the grid and back to data centers and say, by the way, I'm going to see a huge rush of workload in about 3 hours. Be prepared. And through that kind of collaboration and breaking across all those silos, we you know, from the people that we're talking to in some early research and studies, you're going to be able to realize, you know, multiples of efficiency improvements, you know, 2-3 times, because that's how much is on the table right now. If we were just start communicating with each other, that's the way carbon aware computing will evolve in the future. Sorry for that long description. It's just something I talk about a lot. But yeah. And I know panelists here have a different perspective, and I think it's worthwhile listening to other perspectives of what green software is as well.
Really interesting what you say there, as in that you can think of it as a bit like a data center as a hedge fund, where they can consume the energy when it's cheap, and if they're generating energy and there's demand for that electricity elsewhere more than they need, and they can sell the electricity to the extent they don't need it to power the data center. And that then feeds into the sort of scope 3 emissions as people look at their supply chain. As you say, the reason you might want to greenify your use of the data center is not only obviously to just reduce outright power consumption, but also as people look at higher up the supply chain, what are the emissions that have been generated from the use of the data center? You can mitigate some of that. You can't remove it entirely, but you can mitigate it through these sort of smart solutions and carbon awareness, as you say. I think for me, green tech is just as much about the use case of the tech as the use of clean energy in the tech. And that use case might be hardware, it might be software, and a variety of different use cases I've seen in my career, from things like 2-seat electric vehicles and innovative battery technology on the hardware side, to software that can take your mobile phone, scan your home, tell you how to make it more energy efficient or more sustainable, and tell you what solutions are out there, and enable someone to come to your home as a one-stop shop solution. And things like vertical farming. I've raised finance for a number of vertical farming businesses, and they're a combination of hardware, software, and AI. So really interesting to see the whole gamut of software, hardware, and that advanced technology, and the use case being green itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're coming from slightly different perspectives. Stephen, did you have another one, a third one?
No, it's similar to what Simon said. Asim described the hardware, but then he described the data center being able to talk to the consumers. And that's kind of what I see the green software and how I focus on is how do you give them footprinting information? How do you let them know, what gets measured gets managed, right? So how do you help them measure things in a dynamic way? And that's really where software and companies, when you look at where companies are in their decarbonization journey, a lot of them are just on the greenhouse gas accounting step, right? Like the vast majority, 98, 99%, that's where they're focusing and deploying all their capital. And you're seeing a lot of software being used to help them with that greenhouse gas accounting. Very soon, you're going to see that software start to migrate into actually how do you take action? Just like Asim said, hey, in 3 hours, we're going to get throttled, right? There's going to be surge pricing for your server, right? Just like there's surge pricing for Uber. And that's because the grid is dirtier at those times when you're using more energy. And so how do you really use software to educate people like, hey, another application of that, I'm from the United States, if you're in Arizona and you're trying to turn on your air conditioning, if you turn it on from 8 to 10 a.m., it might be twice as dirty when it comes to emissions than from 6 to 8 a.m. because more people have the energy on at that time. So really, how do you give people dynamic information that allows you to make decisions on the spot, but also really allows you to think about from a Scope 3 standpoint too, what's your strategy, right? How do you do abatement? Like, where do you identify hotspots in your supply chain? You need software to go through all this process, because if you're a big company, the Fortune 100 company, you deal with tens of thousands of suppliers, right? And that's really where you're starting to see, okay, how do we engage these suppliers? How do we drive action from these suppliers? How do we use software to do these things? And how do we use software to decarbonize our products, which is where we get most of our revenue. So that's kind of the area that I have more experience as well.
I think to me, the term is a little bit of an umbrella term. If we're able to use any solutions in order to get to a greener planet and reduce the impact of climate change. So my background is software, and I'm always excited about using software to solve real world problems. And I do believe that software can be used to advance great strides in these very complex challenges that we have facing us. So it's interesting that a few of you guys spoke about demand response and using electricity when it's clean, and that rings bells with what we are trying to do in my current startup in a very ambitious way. So we are trying to promote energy independence and clean electricity in order for us to hopefully at one point not have to use electricity that is not clean to begin with.
And I think that's very interesting, Natha, because you're getting into the why. And I think you also, Stephen, Simon, and Asim, you also talked about like what you are what it is, what companies can be doing, but why is it important to measure not just the functionality, but also the environmental impact of software? I mean, you could get to a business case, but we can start with the question why, and then like where is the business case? Because I guess they're closely related.
Yeah, should I start with that? Companies are increasingly required by law to compensate for their carbon emissions. Increasingly, there are emissions trading schemes around the world that say that you're allowed to emit a certain amount of carbon, but if you emit more than that, you have to pay for it by buying emissions allowances in compliance markets. So some companies are compelled to decarbonize, and as part of that, they're going to need to track their progress. Others voluntarily choose to decarbonize because they're under stakeholder pressure to do so, both internal and external. So if you're going to go through the usual process of decarbonizing, you need a measure to understand where you are to start off with. So you can start with a baseline of what your emissions actually are. You then might set a science-based target to determine what your pathway looks like for decarbonizing over coming years. And then you're in the process of avoiding emissions in the first place as best you can, reducing those that you can't, perhaps removing even carbon emissions. And best practice would be then to offset voluntarily the carbon emissions that you can't abate. And finally, you then need to find a decent carbon offset and then make a claim So in order to determine how you're going on that journey, you constantly need to be measuring both where you started, where you are today, your rate of improvement, and then map that against your target. And are you actually remaining on target? And if not, without the data, without that measurement, you can't get to your destination, because you're going to need to constantly refine the journey as you look to decarbonize. And that's got to be data driven.
I agree with it needs to be data driven. There's another big pressure on companies too, and it's investors. If you look at some of the major investment corporations like BlackRock, right? Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, wrote a letter to the CEOs in 2018 where he basically said the biggest risk to all of their assets is climate change. And so if you're an investor and you're looking long term, you really need to take this seriously. And they're putting a lot of money into what Simon just said is measuring all of their portfolio companies' greenhouse gas footprints, right? And then figuring out how from there to decarbonize those. But another reason why is you're also seeing private equity groups putting a lot of pressure on smaller companies. And you're also now seeing a lot of these big companies that have big, that are publicly traded and have these big investment corporations that are influencing their boards and their executives. You're seeing them put pressure on all their suppliers. So companies that might have 15 employees or 10 employees, right? So you're seeing this kind of trickle down. So the why is because from a regulation standpoint, you need to, and from an investor standpoint, you need to. And, if we want the economy to continue to grow over the next 50 years, you need to. So that's the why from my perspective.
And if you're supplying someone, that's really important, because you take Porsche, the sports car manufacturer, they said to their supply chain, there are 200 of you in our supply chain. If you can't achieve certain decarbonization targets by year X, we're going to kick you out. So it becomes really important if you're supplying someone, and most people who are in green tech are supplying someone, you're someone's scope 3 emissions. And if you don't decarbonize and measure that, give them the data they need to track their own scope 3 emissions, then you're at risk of losing clients.
And I think just kind of adding to that, or just not adding to it, just kind of diving a little bit deeper into that. So I remember I was at, and I think measurement is key to everything. If your organization does not have targets set, you're not going to bother measuring anything. So that's kind of usually the step one, is we don't see anybody engaging in this space that already have not set climate targets or already have not started on their journey in that space. But then they're faced with this problem of, well, now we have to measure. And I think we use that term quite without giving it the kind of due respect that it deserves, or we just assume that measuring is kind of a fairly easy task. It's one of the most challenging things there is. I mean, I was at Intel until recently, and I remember sitting down a couple of months in, speaking to the sustainability team, and I wanted to speak to engineers because I was trying to figure out, like, what is the embodied carbon emissions of Intel's chips? Like, how do we actually calculate them? What is the makeup of this? And then, sorry, Simon, this isn't an insulting, but I'm just saying what happened on the call was, like, had a bunch of lawyers turned up on the call. And I'm sitting there thinking, why have I got lawyers on the call trying to answer me very detailed questions on how to measure the emissions of like a very technical device? It's because really a lot of this stuff is and they're doing their best. I'm not saying this is a problem. They're doing their best, because once you get down to this guidance and the work, even with the GHG, you're 2 clicks deep to, you go figure it out. We don't really know. So then you're at the point of trying to interpret kind of guidance and in these very nuanced cases, and you're kind of just trying to judge your best way of how do you actually measure. And that's kind of why, one of the things I believe what we do, we talk about software with me, but actually we're a standards body, and we're creating standards and guidance to really double, triple click into these things. How exactly do you measure? What are you supposed to include? What do you not include? We've got a bunch of questions later on about AI. Everybody says, how do you measure AI? My question is, what is AI? Like, what are you going to include? And this is the things I see. It's people like, we've measured our AI. It's better than our competitors' AI. But really, you measured something different because your competitor measured all of this stuff and you went like, well, I'm going to measure this thing. I'm going to say that's my AI. So what we need in this space is just an unbelievable level of standards. We've barely scratched the surface. It is not easy to measure right now at all.
Yeah, I couldn't agree any more. If you look at a product, outside of just measuring software, even products. So Amazon measures, or Microsoft will measure a laptop differently than Apple will measure a laptop, and Google will measure a laptop, the emissions that come from these things. So there's no standard way of how to measure these things. There's these tools called product category rules, but a lot of these things now are also printed on PDF, so they're not dynamic and they don't update. So if you take actions, you have a PDF that you're going to update in 3 years from now, right? And so the software plays a really important role on measuring when it comes to dynamic measurements, right? Measurements that change when you take actions. But that standardization is the very first step. I couldn't agree anymore, because until you do that, there's no incentive to reduce the emissions of products, because you actually get, you hear greenwashing all the time. If you're measuring your own calories, right, which is essentially what these companies are doing, they're like, hey, my product has lower calories than your product does. And you're like, well, you measured it yourself without a standard way to measure it. So you could easily change what that looks like. So measurement, and then once you actually have a standard way to measure it, it allows companies to focus on, okay, well, actually, how do we reduce this now?
And something that's in the middle of everything. So we talked about the why, and we established legal pressure, stakeholder pressure. Maybe you actually want to do something good and make sure you're working ethically and you want to improve the world. So, I mean, there are many arguments for that as well. But people are at the middle of this. And what you all have in common, all four of you, is that you have managed teams. You worked with products and green software in one way or another. How do you keep teams focused, aware, and learning when it comes to green software? Like, do you have any practices or tips or experiences, anecdotes from your careers? Is this something teams, or we're talking about developers or product managers, think about if they're not that, at the helm of a green tech product specifically?
We typically do that in product management in general, I think, but I think very much relevant to the conversation. The way a lot of these green tech companies started was with a vision of founders that wanted to do something, and they wanted to do something that has an impact by creating a successful business. And what I have seen work very well is when the founders have this vision and they're able to relay it to the team, but at the same time have the metrics and have the measurement and show the growth and success over time. And I think that this creates a sort of flywheel effect, so to speak, that started with a lot of people that wanted to do something that created momentum, that created businesses, that created legislation, that created the need to standardize and measure, and that in and of itself will then continue to push in that direction. And I think that this is an exciting moment because when I first looked at climate tech and was interested in it, maybe around a decade ago, the options out there were very technical and very specific. And now, because of that pattern, they're becoming a lot more mainstream.
Sebastian, I suppose probably falls to me as a lawyer to say define team, right, in your question. And I think what I mean by that is invariably you're not only operating within your own organization, you may be working with consultants, or you may be completely outsourcing the development of the tech. And I found that there were sort of two things that were really important. One was, can they do the job? Do they have the technical competence? But the other one was culture. If you're going to be working closely as a team, co-creating a product together, and your culture between you and the external team that you're relying on are very, very different, it's very difficult to get everyone pulling in the same direction. So when evaluating those service providers, I had to think about a lot more than simply can they do the job, but also what's the culture of the organization? Can my team work with their team? Do we look at the world the same way? And I've certainly had experiences where the cultural fit was great, but actually they just couldn't do the job, and it wasn't a hard job. So I think you have to look at both of those when looking at using teams, building teams, and that collaboration between the internal team and the external team.
Yeah, that's something I've always found very important when I hire teams. I haven't hired tech teams specifically myself, but marketing and communications teams, and making sure the culture is there, the right mindset, working in the same direction. It's everything. I mean, if you have like an internal team or an external team or some kind of collaborative effort where some people are pulling in another direction, I mean, you don't always get to pick who you work with, or there could be an industry that's resisting you. Have you seen that? Have you seen resistance against either transitioning to more green aware coding or to a software, like a software ecosystem that is more sustainable?
I'd say, I mean, when you say the word resistance, I would perhaps translate that to something else, which is everything is just really a trade-off. There are always competing forces inside an organization for the same resources. And so what that means is when sustainability hasn't been prioritized, it's just lost that battle, it's lost that fight. And that could be for a variety of reasons. The right arguments weren't made. The company is not in a situation, they're in a death spiral and they just need to survive, and sustainability goes out the window. So that's kind of like, for the resistance that I see and kind of in having these conversations, I just treat it as trade-offs. And so, you know, I think the first step is just to make sure sustainability is at the table of the conversation, because when people are having these conversations, they're evaluating sustainability versus security versus this versus that. And the sales team is going to present a very compelling argument as for why they should have all of the resources to kind of do all the stuff. And you know, so you need to kind of get a lot better at presenting these arguments, and talking, you know, getting things prioritized. It is unbelievably challenging. I've been sitting inside organizations for years, knocking on every single door you possibly could knock on, trying to find a warm landing place for a project to kind of drive this stuff. But yeah, it's a very hard sell. Sustainability still is a very hard sell. And if you can find those moments where there's an alignment of, you know, the needs of an organization, maybe they've set a climate target which aligns with a particular project, which also aligns with the human being you're speaking to and what they want to achieve out of their goals. You've got to find these moments of alignment, and then the magic happens and things accelerate forward. So that, yeah, so I see resistance as you're in a cacophony where lots of people are screaming for resources, and you just have to do a better job than everybody else, and it's just really hard. Yeah.
You need to make a business case for sustainability. You know, you got to say, this is why it's, you know, there is, what's really nice, you know, being in the US and seeing who we just elected, there is, and this happened 8 years ago. And when it happened 8 years ago, you saw a lot more organizations take the onus on themselves, right? And so you saw a lot of companies say, hey, it's not, the government's not going to do it, we need to do it, right? And I think that there's a lot of power in that as a company to create that culture. You know, if you are looking at how to bring in the best talent, and you're looking at where people want to work right now, and people want to work for companies that make impact. People want to be on the right side of, you know, what we say is the biggest fight of our generation, which is climate change, right? And so I think from a recruiting standpoint, it's great, but also internally, when you have disagreements, people are aligned on the North Star that they're trying to solve, right? So it's easy to disagree and commit when you have a aligned mission. So I think, you know, I haven't seen a ton of resistance specifically from the cultural standpoint. I think it's actually one of the superpowers that we have in this space. We can go get some of the best talent, where we can't compete with the worlds of Microsofts and Amazons for engineers, right? But we know that there's engineers that want to make a difference. We know there's engineers that want to be a part of the solution. So I haven't seen as much resistance.
I guess the place one might see resistance from more than anyone else is the CFO or other budget holders, because ultimately they decide where the money goes. And to both of your points, why should we be spending on green and incurring a green premium when we could be spending the money on something else over here that isn't your pet project or what you want to do? And so a lot of it in terms of leadership is then navigating, well, how do I explain to the CFO or the budget holder that this really matters? And then you have to peel the onion back and go, actually, why does it matter? And to whom does it matter? And ideally, the answer is customers and clients. And then rather than you saying to the CFO, this really matters, you get a critical mass of your clients to say, this really matters and why. And then, because ultimately it's got to be client driven, it's got to be revenue driven. As to Stephen's point, there is a business case as to why we need to be doing this. And it's not only our own business case, but we also fit into other people's supply chains, and they have a business case for us to be greener.
Yeah.
I agree with all of that. And the quick product management element I want to bring to the conversation is that I can't stress enough how important it is in how we tell the story. So in my company, we try and get people to move to clean energy, and that comes with a bill. So we try to tell the story that, to Simon's point about where the money is going, the savings that they would be able to achieve, but also speak to how they would be able to reduce carbon emissions and try and quantify that to tell a holistic story that speaks to everybody.
And that's a very interesting thing to bring up, because that bridges us to our next block, which is the green tech product. And I mean, you mentioned like it could be more expensive. Are there unique challenges? Is price a common one when it comes to finding product market fit compared to what it would be like for other tech solutions? How can you navigate this? What experience do you have there?
I think for us, the biggest challenge has been because green tech is so new, and you're trying to create a startup. Typically in a startup, you want to hire people that already have experience because you don't have the resources to train or the time to do that. But there's no one that has experience because this is so new. So this, I think, has been the catch. I worked a lot on how we can create a successful recruitment process. And I think we try and double down on two things. One is the ability to deal with complexity, because I think things are very dynamic and changing in our space. And you get a lot of great people, but you need to really be looking for someone that has the ability to deal with complexity and ambiguity and change at a fast pace. And the second thing is to try and get creative in terms of what adjacent businesses and technologies you would be looking for. So I, for example, came into climate tech based on my marketplace experience, because there was a need to create a climate tech marketplace product.
Yeah. So a term that I came across quite recently is green UX. I'm sure those of you who work more are with this area are more familiar with this. So my question is sustainable or green UX a real need in developing a product? I think many of you have worked with product development in some form. So how much does the UX and the visual aspect, the user experience, impact sustainability or green software in a notable way? Or is it just greenwashing in some form? What's your experience?
I don't have experience of this, but I suppose just thinking through it logically, the design of the product is really about efficiency. And if there are inefficient steps in the process, that could just be, one extra web page that you have to jump through to get to the ultimate thing that you're trying to do. If there's an inefficiency that results in even a gram of carbon being emitted, actually, depending on the scale of your business, those inefficiencies can generate quite significant opportunities to decarbonize. So it's partly a process thing as much as anything else, as to how can we start thinking about processes being more efficient, not just because it makes the user experience more pleasant and more efficient, but actually because there's an alignment between inefficient UX and the carbon emissions themselves.
And I think that also speaks to like what I was talking before about kind of breaking the silos down. Like when we talk about UX, it's kind of like the final silo, which is the human being consuming the software at the end of the equation, and kind of how do they pass information up and down the stack. There's been some really interesting, from like a tech perspective, there's been some interesting stuff here. There's a oh God, I'm gonna forget it. I'm gonna forget the name of the magazine. I'll do apologize. I'll send it over to you later. There's an online magazine made by Climate Action Tech and the Green Web Foundation, where they demonstrate some, and it's more demonstrating this is possible, where the images will downgrade depending upon how clean or dirty the electricity is. There's actually and I forget, and again, I'm always terrible with names. There's also a fashion company in Europe, where again their website downgrades. So it might show you a picture of a t-shirt, and then it will downgrade to an illustration of a t-shirt. Then it'll just say t-shirt, depending on the emissions. Now the emissions of that is kind of like, it's representing this idea, which is, and I think it speaks to a lot of this stuff. Like, we live in a society where we're so used to just everything instant, everything happening right now. But we live in a world where resources are variable. And kind of a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do is to make sure resources are always there, because a human being might want to have it at the end of the day. But resources might not always be there. Middle of the day, we probably might not be able to have as high quality Zoom calls, but in the evenings, maybe we can have more, but we always want the highest, best quality Zoom call at all the given time. That's kind of, it's driven from this user behavior, this expectation that everything has to be there all the time. There's a beautiful bit of, it was from a student, and again, cannot remember names, but she sent over an idea for what a sustainable operating system would look like. So a literal operating system like Windows. And she explored some wonderful ideas, like the video would turn to audio. And there was another one, which is instead of chatting to someone, can you just tap a message saying, I'm thinking of you, and they tap a button that says, I'm thinking of you back. These are just like interesting ideas that they were exploring. And that actual work was, I can trace a pattern from when I shared that video internally at Microsoft to when the people at Microsoft started thinking about this, and then they actually made Microsoft Windows carbon aware. So actually Microsoft Windows now, and actually Xbox as well, will only download updates when the electricity is clean and not when it's dirty. So it's like, only when you click a button. And actually Apple iOS now has it as well. I'm not on iOS, but on iOS there's a button you can click that says only charge my phone when the electricity is clean. So this kind of like, this is all kind of the user experience. The user is responding and being not just this demanding thing, but I'm willing to flex myself and my experience and my expectations based upon, the rest of the world and what benefits everybody else. I think that's kind of a beautiful aspect to this. Yeah.
And coming from a business case, green UX is also usually more efficient, right? And it also actually helps if you look at like load times, right? You got to figure with green UX, you got to figure out, okay, and again, I don't have a ton of experience in this space, but if it takes a little while to load, that's because there's machines in the background working, right? So if you can cut down load time, that makes it more efficient and less energy, right? So green UX is about how do you improve the customer experience while also reducing the consumption that comes with it.
I'd like to comment on what Asim alluded to, that it's really a culture shift that is ongoing, and having been in software for 18 years now, there is a huge culture shift where, just until very recently, the culture in software has always been about hyper growth, growth at all costs, without paying attention to the resources, be that money, humans, let alone energy. We've all been in startups that have, I for sure, been in startups that have literally burned through millions of dollars. And I think without achieving, as Stephen mentioned, like a robust business case. And I think that this is a great moment in time in which there is a lot more pressure into being a lot more disciplined with the software that we can use for more efficient software, like Simon said, and to take a disciplined approach to finding product market fit and formulating hypotheses and be heads down into validating those hypotheses. I could go on for hours, but I do think that this is why we have had so much waste running in all directions, chasing growth versus following these product management practices.
And I guess you can make progress both by making sure the code of what you develop, the UX design is very green and sustainable, but you can also have the use cases and the products to help maybe accelerate decarbonization, have other green impact. And then there are some use cases which actually are quite detrimental from, the efficiency, like AI solutions, for an example, that use a lot of energy, where the case might be very good, but they also use a lot of energy. Before we get to that energy use, are you aware of, or can you highlight or give some examples of a cool AI ML driven green tech initiative that maybe is actually worth the energy consumption, that does something good?
I suppose, is it worth it? I think anything that saves time has a financial worth, has an economic value. Two interesting use cases that have come across my desk in the last 6 months in sustainability and carbon markets. In sustainability, an AI company in North America created Ferrari's sustainability report in hours using public and private data. And so to be able to create that sort of high quality report out of data in a range of sources to the sort of level of quality that the industry expects in that sort of a time frame is game changing for companies in terms of the reporting of progress. In my world today of carbon markets, one of the key things that we have to do is to collect data and communicate it. We have to take a lot of unstructured data and explain what the project is going to do and how many carbon credits it's going to generate and why. And then there's all sort of monitoring that goes on, a lot of digital monitoring, reporting and verification. And all of that could be accelerated through AI. So that same company that did Ferrari's sustainability report in a matter of hours can also create these project design documents for carbon projects, which are a sort of condition precedent to being able to create carbon credits. You have to write this document, and it normally takes months. But through AI, again, you can create these documents in a matter of hours using directly from unstructured data. And that is really exciting for me as we look to accelerate the pace with which these projects can go from ideation to completion.
Another really cool use case, and I think it's vital, is transparency across supply chains. So you're starting to see companies, AI companies, launch the ability for companies to do instant footprinting of products, going back to the measuring the carbon in products. And they can do that because they're pulling a bunch of different data sets and then leveraging information from supply chains to do that. So I think that understanding supply chains, understanding, like, most companies have visibility into like 2 layers of their supply chains. not 10 layers. AI can help solve that problem. AI can help figure out where the hotspots are across supply chains that need to be decarbonized. So where to focus high leverage dollars. So for me, there's a lot AI. I mean, I see, the first thing is measurement, then it's decarbonizing, and then it's innovating all new products. And AI is important for every single aspect of that. You're seeing AI create new proteins. Biochemistry is going to be essential for us to actually innovate on all the different products that we're going to be making in the future, right? Steel we might figure out the biochemistry of how spider webs are made, and that can help with steel creation, right? AI is going to be very important for the leveraging how to make new materials, and it already has. You've already seen AI be used to create hundreds and hundreds of new materials. So I think AI is going to be important in every single one of those spheres.
So I'm hearing saving man hours in green efforts is crucial, and also supporting innovation and solution generation in industries that might otherwise have even more negative impact on the costs of running these models.
And also to
Right.
accelerate the pace, because of those man hours, you're accelerating the scale and pace of delivering impact, which is ultimately what it's all about.
In fusion energy too, AI, because of how hungry these databases are, all the big AI companies are putting lots of money into fusion research. In Seattle, we're lucky that there's a bunch of fusion companies out here. So I think AI and the cost of these data centers is what's really going to drive fusion energy. And you're already seeing that. OpenAI has invested a lot of money in a company called Helion out in the Seattle area. So I think AI is going to be why we actually break through the barrier and are actually able to create fusion energy in the future.
Cool.
I think definitely just to respond to a few just a comment I did warn you I was going to perhaps disagree with a few points here. So yeah, I think there's definitely, and I think that when we say AI, we have to be careful because there are many different flavors of AI these days. And the things that are kind of very power hungry these days is what's called generative AI. But there's been AI solutions in the climate space for many, many, many years. I mean, I was in climate. There was a Microsoft, there was AI for Earth, and they were using a lot of AI just to measure, how many trees did you say you planted? Well, we counted this many. That's what the AI said. You don't need that kind of incredible power hungry aspects of AI to do that kind of compute, but generative AI is another one. I think though the thing that I'm kind of caution people on, because I'm starting to hear that narrative a lot more, which is that AI is actually less than the number of human hours it would take to do it, and therefore kind of the carbon emissions of AI is therefore worth it. But when you actually
not necessarily
look at,
saying that.
yeah, I'm not saying you are. I'm
the
just
inverse.
yeah, there are, but there is this kind of like narrative I'm seeing forming generally, and I wanted to like comment on this general narrative that I'm hearing. And I think we have to be cautious a little bit about the AI work these days, because we have to remember it's still massively loss leading. A large amount of the cost of AI is, right now you're getting the cheapest AI I think you'll have for a very, very long time. Like it's all being funded through various sources. It's not being paid for by you. Which also means that the carbon emissions of your AI is kind of a lot more significant than you might seem from the amount of money that you're actually paying for these services. We've done kind of some analysis, and it's yes, like an AI doing a job versus a human, if you just treated it as kind of a one-shot AI, is less. But the way we're seeing, and where I'm seeing a lot of companies exploring kind of how do we make AI more sustainable for us is my employees are doing 20 prompts to this AI to solve this problem. Is that right? Is 20 prompts too much? How much emissions is 20 prompts? Are there ways we can get that down to 10 prompts to finish this report? And that's kind of something I think that's important that we need to both figure out and also acknowledge that really these days it's not human versus AI, it's human versus a human and an AI that are working together. because I don't know if you ever use ChatGPT, but I've tried to use ChatGPT many times to write reports, and it invents so many things that you have to like go through. I was about to do an article and I was about to release it, and this is like a year and a bit ago, and ChatGPT was just coming along, and I was like, I'll just click these links, and it had completely made up entire kind of standards that didn't even exist in the world. They're just like, this looks convincing. So I think that we have to be cautious with AI, because I think AI is like AI plus a human that is managing that AI, and overall we want that to be more efficient and better, but it's something we have to measure it.
If there are more replies to that, I just first want to stick in that we are going to accept questions from the audience. If you have any questions, you can write them now. There's a couple of minutes delay, so we won't have them instantly. So if anybody else wants to comment on the energy use of AI, or the, let's say, cool, useful implementations or use cases you have seen, we have time for another answer.
Well, when you're prototyping with AI, you use these general models, these big general purpose models, and they're a lot less energy efficient. And as your products become more mature, you can then refine them and use smaller models to do those certain tasks. And in fact, a lot of the cases, what you're seeing is companies will use a general purpose model, and then they get in, and then they might use 15 different small models to do different aspects of the software. So there's a lot of ways to be efficient when it comes to using AI. It was interesting, Awesome, to hear you say that this is the most expensive. We'll see these models. It kind of reminds me of 2019 before COVID, when everything with Uber was cheap, everything was cheap because investors were the ones that were paying for it all, right? The consumers weren't really the ones paying for it. So when you said that, it kind of reminded me of that, and I hadn't thought about that, but it seems to be the case. But that from a software standpoint, that's really a way to be more efficient. You start big, you start with a general purpose vehicle, and you say, okay, what am I trying to solve? And then you refine it, and you use different little models, and there's some pretty cool models out there. So,
and Nakhla, did you have something to add before we jump to the questions?
I was gonna sort of comment on the pattern here. I think in general in software, as we product managers make decisions, we usually look at the ROI, and so the value versus benefit. And by virtue of machine learning, what AI used to be called, being just more expensive than regular software, you would look at it, if anything, with a little bit more scrutiny. However, technologies have cycles, and right now with generative AI, we are going through the hype cycle, and that's why money is being thrown at it without necessarily looking at the path to profitability. Very, very, it's very interesting that Stephen mentioned Uber, the exact same problem. And I think that as part of the culture shift that is happening, I think as the work that you are doing and your organization is doing can help a lot in the awareness and the cultural shift for folks to understand that, them sitting down and literally chatting with ChatGPT is actually something that has a big energy impact.
Yeah, so that's a call to action to all the consumers out there as well. I like that. Thank you so much. We're now going to move to some questions. We have several questions from the audience. One question is from Alina, who's asking, how can developers be more mindful of energy consumption? That's a trick one, but also quite concrete.
I'll just say you have to, well, it's all about measurement. I mean, generally people want to have some guidance for where to go to. I would start off always from if you're doing my definition of green software, I'd start off by we've got some free training. About 10,000 people have taken, 100,000 people have taken it already. It's at learn.greensoftware.foundation. There you'll hear like the basics of energy and kind of why it's important and this other stuff. And if you're specifically looking at measurement, I recommend looking up a project that we've got called Impact Framework, if.greensoftware.foundation. It won't give you your answers because it's still extremely hard to measure energy of software. You would be shocked at how we think we're having this really refined conversation about all this, and we can't measure how much energy a process runs on a laptop, or it's still very challenging. But yeah, you'll find some guidance there as well.
The awareness is one important thing, and that's also something we're trying to solve with our workshops on green coding from Beetroot. Good. Okay, we have a couple of more questions. One question is, well, this is an interesting one from Suri, asking, do people actually care about green software, or are companies just saying they do because it sounds good? How can we really tell?
Going back to the business case of it, I mean, just talking to the CFO, right? If you're like, hey, we can reduce the energy consumption, or we can reduce our costs by X amount, right? So I think companies do care about green software. But I think what companies, again, thinking about the use case, green software is more than just like, it's very important to measure and reduce the emissions that come from actual software, specifically if you're a large software corporation. But if you also think about how you can leverage it as a business case and leverage it to drive growth in your business. So if you look at like Redfin or Zillow now, you can actually see flood maps. They give you a climate warning. They give you all these different things now that's actually built into the product. And if I'm looking to buy a house, I want to be able to quickly click a button and say, this is the fire risk, this is the flood risk, this is this. So if it's adding value to the user and it's a competitive advantage, yeah, companies care about it because that's what they're trying to fight for, right? They're all fighting for competitive advantage. So not only can it make you more efficient and more cost effective as an organization, but it can also help you grab new markets and set yourself apart.
What was the name of that service where you could see the flood risk? And
yeah, Zillow or Redfin. Zillow or Redfin are both ways to search for houses. And so they're just websites you can go to.
Right.
But you can actually go look at that and see, you could even say at 3 meters of, where's water going to be? And so it's evolved because a few years ago they came out with like just a score, and now they're actually diving into it and people are using it more and more. And so it's a differentiator from them and other services.
Yeah. I mean, I live close to Valencia, Spain, where they just had huge floodings recently. So that's top of mind.
Yeah.
A question for everybody here. I think this is a quite open one. What are some of the future trends you see in green software, and how should companies prepare for them? Give you a moment to think. Yes.
For me, I think, did I talk about it in the pre-talk, or did I talk about it at the target thing? So for me, it's this, or maybe I didn't talk about it at all. For me, it's this evil. I think the way people are going to be building software very soon, from the near future, we want to see this evolve. We've been calling it carbon-aware computing, which is building software that just responds to the energy grid. And we want people to start building software so it responds completely to the entire system and, to the users, to the data centers, the telecoms. So we're all just playing nicely together instead of everybody expecting everybody else to perform at peak performance all the time. And then you have overcapacity and so much embodied carbon wasted with systems. So that's the way I see green software is this evolution of carbon-aware computing to be like true. And I think we're going to build software very differently in the future than we have in the past. And actually, AI has been the thing driving this because the energy demands of AI are so high that it's forcing people. AI is very interesting. It's like as a forcing function. It's like it's shot up so far, so quick. It's forcing people to do things differently.
And I think just on AI, I mean, a lot more developers these days use AI for actual coding and implementation of the products. Is that maybe an opportunity? Because the AI, they know, like the AI will basically know how to keep the code sustainable. Creating that code, maybe not sustainable, it's Gen AI, but the actual implementation might actually be aware of best practices. So could that be like a silver lining?
It is. I've heard of a couple of people kind of exploring the space, but I've not seen anybody actually develop or land on something pretty a broad spectrum here. But yeah, there's been a lot of interest in that space. Yeah.
I guess if we're able to get rid of the hallucination problem, that might help.
Yeah. Good start. A lot of cool projects doing that. But look, we're out of time. I wish we could have taken a few more questions, but I think you've all had a lot of very nice things to say, and I didn't want to interrupt anybody. So I'm very happy with where we are. Before I say goodbye, I want to say thank you to all the speakers. I'm sharing my screen here again, so you're going to get this QR code. And if you scan this QR code, you're going to go to a PDF. So it's not a landing page, it's a PDF you can download. But inside this PDF, you have an introduction to all of the speakers. You have a link to their website, their LinkedIn. So if there was anyone you found particularly interesting, don't hesitate. I'm sure they wouldn't mind if you reached out to talk more. And with that said, I think we'll wrap this up. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you for listening, everybody out there. Have a great afternoon and evening and day.
Wonderful hosting, Sebastian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great meeting you all.
Bye-bye.